Hey, it's Donna Cravata, and we are here again with another great interview for the Real 50 Over 50. But before we start today, it is September 11th, and this is the first time in 23 years that I have actually done something visible on September 11th, because to me it is a day of deep honor. And I would just like to take a moment and just have a moment of silence. And if you can join us, that would be great. So just going to take a minute. Okay, that was maybe, I don't know exactly, but it's close to a minute, and a minute is long when we're live. But I just really wanted to honor the day. I'm a New Yorker, born and bred, so it just means a lot. Thank you, Minette. Thank you for doing that with
Of
me.
course.
Um, but now I'm going to introduce Minette, and then we're going to get started and have a conversation. Minette Norman is an author, speaker, and leadership consultant who previously spent decades leading global technical teams in the Silicon Valley and the software industry. She helps leaders create inclusive, psychologically safe team cultures so everybody can thrive fully and contribute. This work was informed by her 30 years of experience working in the Silicon Valley. At age 59, she decided she wanted to dedicate the next phase of her life to helping leaders do better. She's also the author of The Boldly Inclusive Leader and the co-author of the Psychological Safety Playbook, Lead More Powerfully by Being More Human. And she is committed to helping leaders unleash the full potential of the people in their organizations, which is such important work. Welcome. And I look forward to kind of diving in and learning more about what you do, because we companies are broken.
Oh, yeah.
But before we do that, let's learn about what happened when you turned 50.
Yes, it's so interesting. I had to go back and actually look at the calendar to think about what was happening when I was 50 to remind myself. And it was a good reminder because when I turned 50, right around that time, it was I had been an individual contributor in tech for many years, and then I moved into management. But I never had this ambition to climb the corporate ladder
Mhm.
until around age 50. And so we'll just call it the day I turned 50. I had been looking at the leaders above me and being very critical often of like,
Yeah.
they don't know what they're doing. This is an awful place to work or whatever. And I started to feel like I could do that. I could do that better. I think I would be a really good leader. And so around age 50, I got ambitious. I got more ambitious than I had ever been in my life. And I applied for more senior jobs and I got them. And then I ultimately, moved up to VP level, leading 3,500 engineers at a big tech company. It was something about 50 where I just could no longer tolerate bad
Yeah.
leaders. And I
Yeah.
decided, well, if you can't tolerate them, maybe you need to be them and you need to do
Yeah.
better. So,
Yeah.
so that's what I did, and I did that through my whole 50s. And you just
Mhm.
said in my little bio there at age 59, at age 59, after having a really successful decade in my 50s of increasing responsibility, I was forced out of my job.
Mhm.
And it was a leadership change, really awful circumstances, honestly. And I had to negotiate whether I could continue to work for a bully. I had a bully boss, or leave. And I decided to leave. And so there I was like over 59, no clue what I was going to do. I knew I wasn't done. I absolutely knew I wasn't done. I knew I had lots of, accrued wisdom and experience and tons of energy.
And you were
And
just really getting started. You'd only done what you wanted to do for 9 years.
exactly, exactly. So, I think this leads us to the next thing is then what happened when you turned 60, right? Because now I'm 64.
Mhm.
But when I turned 60 was the year that I'd been out of it took me like I would say about 6 months to recover from leaving my job when I wasn't prepared to leave. So there I am turning 60 in 2020 during our COVID shutdown. And I realized, one, I'm not done working, but two, I want to share everything I have learned over these years and help leaders do better. And I cannot work for another boss. I
Yeah.
mean, I was really clear about that at age 60. Like, I have to be my own boss. And I never thought of myself as entrepreneurial, but I said, well, you can't work for someone else. You have to work for yourself. So I started my own business, being a speaker and a consultant, and then ended up writing a couple of books. And now, as you said, I feel like I'm still just getting started.
Mhm. Yeah, me too. I mean, like, I left corporate in 2006, and my son was 4 years old, getting ready to go to kindergarten, and I realized I'd never see him,
Yeah.
and I was like, "I'm not okay with that." And, I started to look for a job closer to where I live, and there was nothing that was gonna touch the job that I had, and I was like, "I'm not good with that either, so, like, what are my
Yeah.
options?" And in 2006, I started a virtual business when nobody had them.
Yeah, that's early. That
Yeah,
was really
yeah,
early.
and I figured it out, and we grew up together. And November will be 18 years.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah, and it feels really good, like, when you realize, like, well, nobody's gonna put up with this.
Exactly. I was talking to some old friends this week, college friends, and they're saying, "So, what's going on with you, Minette?" And I'm like, "I'm really busy." Like, there was a little bit of a summer lull, which was nice. I got to have a little extra time. And all of a sudden, I'm getting all these speaking engagements and consulting
Mhm,
engagements. Like, the work now is coming to me, and it's
yeah,
like, this is a dream come true.
yeah, that's what happens when you lay the
Yeah.
foundation,
Yeah.
that's what happens.
Yeah.
It's a good feeling, it's a good place to be.
I agree, and I'm having fun, because I get to do what I wanna do and on my terms, and, I think
Yeah,
that's what's being
exactly.
60, 50 plus, but certainly 60 plus. Yeah,
And not, like, when we reach this age group, if you're still in a job, there's always that worry, like,
yeah,
every day is when's the shoe gonna drop?
yep,
And you don't have that. You know, you don't have that. Or I have to stay where I am because that's where my job is. You
yeah.
can if you decide you wanna move, you can move.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, and I feel like now people hire me because of my wisdom and
Yeah,
experience,
yeah,
whereas, like, I never talked about my age when I was in tech. Tech is such a
mm,
youth-oriented business. Like, okay, people knew I was older, but I wasn't gonna declare, "I'm 59," right? Yeah.
it's very true. It's very true. And, now it's a benefit. It's
Yeah,
it's it's a benefit, and the people that will hire you for that, you don't have to prove anything to them because they're seeking you out because that's what they want. They have already
exactly.
gotten past all of that.
Exactly. It's a feature, not a bug, as we would say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, talk to me more a little, about, inclusive leadership and how that fits in with culture, um, with teamwork, how people work together, maybe a little multi-generational
Mhm. Yep.
conversation because that, that really has an impact because we're all different in so many ways. And, the culture is a big one that I'm really curious about. Like, how are you seeing culture shifting um, and people realizing that empathy and caring are parts of leadership, also a feature, not a bug.
Yes, exactly. Oh, well, this is right in my wheelhouse, and this is what I experienced in tech in my years, and what I see with my clients now is how things are shifting. But
Mhm,
but why I decided to focus on inclusive leadership is it was really informed by my years
mhm,
being it was twofold. It was being part of teams, like being on a staff, and feeling like there's an insiders club, and there's everybody else.
mhm,
And even when I reached a very high level of leadership, I often felt like I was not quite in the inner circle. And there were many of us who were not part of that in group. And, it was for all sorts of reasons. It could be your background, it could be just how you think. And sometimes it was gender, but it wasn't always gender. And sometimes it was age. It's all, as you said, there's so many ways we are different, all the aspects of diversity, both, very clear and hidden things. And so I wanted to change that because what I was seeing is that all of the people who felt like they were not part of that insiders club, they often, and I will put myself in this bucket, often we wouldn't speak up, we wouldn't share our ideas because either our voices weren't heard or we were interrupted or dismissed, or you just couldn't find a word in edgewise because all the dominant people were speaking all the time.
Yeah.
And what I was seeing now that I was then leading a very large team is that we as an organization are not benefiting from this wealth of knowledge and diverse ways of thinking and perhaps innovative ways of thinking. We're not tapping into it because we're continuing to listen to the loudest, most dominant voices.
Yeah.
And it destroys a culture in many ways because there's been so much emphasis on hiring diverse teams, but what I was saying is like, yeah, you hire diverse teams of people, but then
Yeah.
you don't let people be themselves. You
Be
don't,
diverse.
right, you don't invite the diversity, you actually invite conformity, and
Yeah.
you almost demand conformity.
Yeah.
And what I see shifting now is that, you talked about the generations, like the newer generations in the workplace are not putting up with this
No.
anymore. And, they are demanding different kinds of leadership, different kinds of organizations. And, hallelujah, because it's long overdue.
Yeah.
And so it's really, really interesting. When I was still at my last job in tech, I started talking about empathy and compassion. I actually did a keynote at our engineering summit about empathy. And it was at the time fairly radical to be talking about empathy. This is probably like 2017 or something like that. But I wasn't just going to do this ill-informed. I started to read about empathy and compassion and how that plays out in the professional world. And I discovered the first ever report. It's now in its 9th year, but there's a report called The State of Workplace Empathy. And it comes out from Business Solver. This year, 2024 is the 9th year. And it's been so fascinating to follow that report. The research is global that they do every year to find out that people value empathetic and compassionate leaders. They demand it in the workplace. And there's a very big divide between what employees are experiencing and what, for example, CEOs, because they have the demographic of CEOs, HR people, and then everyone else. The CEOs think they are highly empathetic. And the employees are saying not so much. That's not what we're experiencing. But I think it was last year, it might have been last year's report. One of the big findings was that CEOs recognized that empathy is important in the workplace, but, and here's the big but, they were afraid that if they showed empathy, they would appear as weak.
Yeah.
And the opposite is true. And this is, in some of the work that I do is like being empathetic is a superpower and it is a strength. It is not a weakness. And that is, having to shift, especially for people who were brought up in sort of the old models of leadership, which is what I'm hoping and trying to change every single day.
Yeah. And, there's such, like, I was brought up in the old models of leadership working in law
Yeah.
firms, and there was so much that was unhealthy and broken about that system. And I'm sure it was the same in tech. I mean, they were our clients. I mean, we were
Yeah.
kowtowing to them. But I've been out for a long time, but I sit and I think about, like, the younger people that are coming up now that are in their 20s or early 30s, and how they wouldn't put up with any of the nonsense that we had to put up with at the time. And all the way up to the top, like the women partners were brutalized really
Yeah.
with how they were treated and what they had to go through to get to that spot. And um, I just I get happy when I think about, like, that an entire generation is going to force change
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah.
just not going to put it together. But I think that people our age bring such a value because we are like the bridge.
Yeah.
Because we know how to kind of like take the good parts of what of the way business was done before, and know the danger zones as warning signs, so that can be taught to younger leaders so they know when they're crossing a divide, because power does change people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. I feel like, I really do believe that this things that I talk about, it's all teachable. It's not like it's, something elusive out there.
Yeah.
What I think there's I guess it's a worry on both sides. Like when
Mhm.
you think about people who are in current leadership positions trying to, you know, bridge this divide of like, can I be empathetic? Am I going to be weak, etc. There are a lot of misconceptions too. And then the younger generation who often like they will come in and challenge in a way that can be really unhealthy. Like, oh no, you can't give me feedback because it makes me feel bad,
Yeah.
right? You know, and so having to navigate
Yeah.
sort of these two extremes of like command and control, and I tell you what to do,
Mhm.
old school,
Mhm.
versus oh no no, you know, I'm a sensitive flower and you can't do anything to tell me what to do. There's a middle, there's a
Yeah,
middle ground, and
exactly.
navigating that is tricky.
Yeah.
And I feel like we can still, you know, we can hold people accountable and we can still demand that they fulfill their goals and, you know,
Mhm.
deliverables and things like that in a compassionate way. And you know,
Yes.
an example of that is like I remember having an employee who was just not getting their work done. Now I could come in and just yell at them, but that wasn't my style. My style was like, okay, let me understand what's going on because the work needs to get done and something's getting
Mm.
in the way. Can you help me understand? And you know, we found a way forward because that person was going through some stuff that was getting
Mhm.
in the way. And it was more like just my being curious to listen and to then help figure out how do we get the work done while you're going through something like this. And
Yeah.
both are possible, right?
Yeah, and I did an interview a couple of weeks ago with, Vicky Townsend, who's in this group also, and, she helps people get through divorce, and she
Mm,
brings that in as an IEP into corporations. And, she said one of the top 5 reasons, um, one of the top 5 things that happens to employees through divorce is they end up quitting their jobs because they're
right.
afraid to tell anybody what they're going through, and then their work performance decreases because of everything that's going on with them personally. So creating that atmosphere where, there's an openness to share what's going on with you personally, because it is going to impact what you're doing at work. It is going to impact the relationships that you have, and what a difference, because it's expensive and life disruptive
Yes.
to leave jobs.
Yeah, for the person, for the company, it's, you know, and the thing is that this is where I say like there's some really simple things we can do
Yeah,
as leaders, and that is what you just said. Get to know the people that work with you.
yeah,
Talk to them one on one as fellow human beings, not as, you know, boss and employee, and find out what's going on with them, and not to probe in ways that they're uncomfortable, but just get great. It takes time, right? It takes time to get to know someone. And, you know, the things that I discovered over time in getting to know my many, many employees over the years, like it's kind of mind boggling what people do start to share with you once they
mhm,
trust you and know that it is safe to
yeah,
share that, you know, I'm dealing with an aging parent or I'm dealing with childcare issues or a family illness or whatever it is. And like, okay, let's help you get through this because we want to keep you here.
yeah.
And we also know that you have a life outside of work. And to try to pretend those two do not exist simultaneously is just, you know, a lack of reality check.
Yeah, and but that's the way it was, and that's the way
It
it
was.
still is in a lot of places too.
Yeah.
Like, when I got pregnant, I was afraid to tell anybody I was
Yeah.
pregnant, and that was 2001.
Yep. Yeah. No, and you know it's still true in many,
Yeah,
many places. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And,
Exactly.
another big piece of this is also listening,
Huge.
and not just with your ears.
You know, listening, it's a chapter in both books that I've written. It is where I start, honestly, with
Mm,
all of my work with leaders, because there's this sense, you know, and this is part of the models of leadership we have seen, that leaders need to know everything. And so listening, you know, they think they know how to listen. Of course, we all think we know how to listen as an innate human skill, but as you said, it's not just with our ears, it's also how we get to know the people, we get to hear their ideas, and we have to listen with absolute curiosity because we think you know, we see things through our own lenses, but we're missing huge pieces, obviously. So listen, I always say that listening is an inclusive leadership superpower, and that we have to deliberately commit to listening, and that means, you know, getting the distractions out of the way first of all, but also not feeling, especially when we're in a leadership position, that we have to be preparing our response. You know, there's this definite prejudice, I would say, in the business world for fast, what you would call fast thinkers, which is really just fast talkers, right? Like who responds with the quip that is just so clever, or the quick and intelligent response. But instead of being getting ready for that response, is just to stick with listening. And as you said, it's beyond the ears. It's like, what's going on with this person, listening for what's not being said,
Mhm.
asking follow-up questions, looking for the emotions behind the words, and checking to
Mhm.
make sure you're understanding before you even consider offering your own perspective. That
Yeah,
takes
and
a lot of practice.
it does, and it's beyond the conversation too, because, I
Yes.
mean, just, like, looking at the work that they're producing, looking at those gaps in the work and, like, where something is different from where it was a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, and that can go in either direction. That could be that there is something that's going downhill or something that's improving,
Yeah.
and, it's just it changes everything when you learn how to do that.
Yeah. And I will say I learned, I feel lucky that I learned it early in my management career because, we honestly, one of the reasons I do the work that I do is I think we're so badly trained to be leaders and managers. We
Mhm,
basically, like, I was a good technical writer. They promoted me to manage technical writers. And then my management career began with, a few courses here and there.
mhm,
But we were all ill prepared. But what I learned fairly early on, I'm pretty extroverted, and I didn't quite understand the differences between how introverts and extroverts process information and communicate and all that. But I had a very introverted staff member who I had a very hard time getting to know because he was so quiet and reserved. But I just stuck with it. Every time we had our one on one, I'd learn a little bit more about him. And I learned to tolerate silence because listening with him meant that, I might ask a question. And the way he processed information was that he needed some time. And also, English was not his first language. So he's also processing in another language. So I had to learn to just let there be silence. And when I did that, the magic happened because he was one of the most innovative people I'd ever met. And he had these incredible ideas that he wanted time to think through before he shared. And when he started to share them with me, I realized we're going to change everything we do in this department.
yeah. Yeah, and people that think that deeply, um, they don't talk just to talk. They talk when they have
No.
something to say.
Exactly. And I was so glad to learn that lesson fairly early on in managing people, because then I could make space for that and, run things differently to make sure we would hear from the quieter people.
Yeah, and being on the receiving end of that, um, that opens up the opportunity for people who ordinarily will not speak up because they don't feel comfortable for whatever the reason may be. But it invites them almost to speak
Ex-
because there's always going to be a space, even if today isn't the day. They're
Yeah.
building up to it, from one meeting to the next meeting to the next meeting because they know that there's going to be space.
Exactly. And one of the things that I think was so important that I also learned, and this was probably later in my career, I remember reading about, I was doing some reading about inclusion, and I found this neuroscience research from this researcher at UCLA, Matthew Lieberman, who actually studied situations where people, he did lab situations where people were excluded. And what he discovered is that the brain lights up with pain. The brain registers pain when we are excluded, and it's no different from physical pain. So when I learned that, it was this aha moment of, oh my God, all these people every day at work are feeling pain because we are not in the inside group. We're being excluded. And I vowed to do something to change that. But I think what we all need as human beings, it's part of us as a species, how we've evolved. We need to be connected, and we need to feel that we are heard and seen and valued for who we are. And so being able to listen to anyone, no matter how they communicate and no matter how they process information, that is going to make them feel valued. And that's going to make them be able to contribute in ways that you may not even be able to imagine. And that's what was so eye-opening for me as a leader.
Now, I heard this on an interview. I don't even remember who said it about a week or so ago, but it's about AI.
Mhm.
And as teams are bringing AI into their workflow, they're gaining hours back every day when it's done properly. When it's
Yeah,
not done properly,
yeah.
that's a whole other conversation. But now they're finding themselves with 3 or 4 extra hours a day, and they feel guilty.
Oh.
What can you say about that?
Oh, that's so interesting. That's so interesting. So, I would try to reframe guilt
Yeah.
into like, what might I do with those extra
Mhm.
hours? And, I think one of the things that's really interesting in the working world is that we have our regular jobs, right? And whatever that is, you're an engineer, you're a designer, you're a marketer. But there are all sorts of other things that may be interesting, and there may be problems that need to be solved that you could
Mhm.
help with that are beyond the boundaries of your job description.
Mhm.
And those are the things that, first of all, may benefit the organization you work in. And also, they are going to be incredibly motivating to you as an employee. So rather than sitting in guilt, like I have nothing to do, go learn something new, go meet with someone from another department and see how you might be able to volunteer to help them. And, there's really interesting research about this. And the idea is called job crafting. There's a
Mm.
Yale researcher, Amy Rosnevsky, who invented that term, but it's basically doing something that is beyond the description of your job that benefits the organization. It turns out that makes employees more resilient, more motivated, they have better mental health, and then the organization benefits. So
Mm.
yay to getting more efficient with AI.
Mhm.
What else might you do? I mean,
Yeah.
the possibilities are limitless, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I did when I had my job,
Yeah, huh?
because I was bored. So I just
Right.
going and finding other things to do. And I realized early on that I needed, if I wanted to move up at all, because you get really stuck in these
Yeah.
positions and they don't let you move. If I wanted to move at all, I needed to be involved with the people that were making the decisions and the people that were collecting the money.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what I did, and they ended up creating a role for me and in the based on my skill set, and they don't do that in law firms.
That's incredible. So you job crafted your own job, and then yeah, that's
Yeah, but
great.
this was in, like, 1990.
Wow. Oh, you're such a trailblazer, Donna.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they never filled my spot when I left because it
Wow.
was it was mine.
Yeah, it was made for you, and only you probably could do that role.
Yeah,
When
and
I was when oh, go ahead.
I took so many of those skills into my business.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, what I was just going to say quickly is that at the end of my years, I was leading engineering, and I had this big role. But I was also doing all these side hustles because they were interesting to me. I was doing all this mentoring. I was an executive sponsor for one of our ERGs. I was helping our diversity, equity, and inclusion leader because that's where my interest was. And I think that really helped me when I left the company figure out, like, oh, this is really where I want to be working in leadership and inclusion and stuff like that. But that was completely a side hustle because I found it interesting, and
Mhm.
I didn't want to just focus on tools and technology. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing what's possible when you're curious.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, I think that's the key. I think that's the key to our thriving, no matter what age we are, is staying curious, continuously learning, continuously exploring new things. Like I feel like I'm just, yeah, as I said, just getting started. The
Yeah.
world is just so fascinating, and people are so fascinating, and there is so much to learn.
I agree, I agree. So we're winding up here, um, and I just wanna pop up your website so people can find you
Mm.
there, and I like to wrap up these interviews asking for a wisdom bomb.
Hmm. I think my wisdom bomb, after 64 years, there's a lot of bombs I could throw out there. I'm going to pick one, and that is that don't let anyone tell you who you should be or what you should do, and just be who you want to be,
Mhm.
your best self. And don't let anyone else tell you, oh, don't do that. You should do that. You know what you want. So
Yeah,
do that.
that's a good one. And on that note, I'm gonna say thank you, and it's been lovely spending some time with you today. If you are listening on the replay, please tag us and ask questions, comments, and we'll keep the conversation going. I'm going to be back tomorrow with a wisdom panel on walking the Camino, and every Wednesday for a very long time with
Fantastic.
another woman to interview. So thank you, Minette, and I really appreciate all the wisdom that you brought today.
Thanks for having me, Donna. It was a great conversation.